I appreciate you coming here. Can everybody hear me? Ed, can you hear me?
I got you.
You got you. Good. Well, then we are live here, which is kind of exciting for us because it looks like we did something half right this time.
Did you hit the record button?
Let me make sure I did that. Hold on, because we did that before. It is recording. So we just did last week's and did not record it. So that wasn't a good one. I am going to look for one thing. My name is John, and thank you for coming. Most of you I probably know. And Ed is here joining us. This is Ed Hirshon. He's a lawyer in Annapolis that specializes in the Second Amendment. And this guy's one of the guys that I'd have to say in the top, I would say 5 to 10 people that have spent time in Annapolis this session fighting for, fighting for or against, depending on where you are, many, many bills. And he's going to join us. He's probably one of the only attorneys in the state of Maryland that has gone to what's called the Office of Administrative Hearings. And he's testified before the Senate. So I'm going to
and the House.
And the House. That's true. Both of them. You did a great job on both of them. And we're going to share this information with you today, kind of bring you up to date, even up to date to today, what's going on as of today. He had a meeting yesterday with 3 prominent House members, right? And we're supposed to be joined tonight. One of the members of the Handgun Permit Review Board could not join us because 21 hours ago she became a grandmother.
Became a grandmother.
And I think we got John. John, you online now?
Yes, sir. How you doing, John?
How are you? I'm doing great. Listen, I appreciate you so much for coming online. And what we're going to do, folks, is you have men here that have been involved to, I think, some of the greatest degrees of any citizens. There's 2 or 3 more I could think of that know what's going on intimately in Annapolis, that have working relationships, that's involved in the legislation, involved in hearing and government appointment processes like John. So I'm going to turn it over to John first because he just got off the Amtrak, probably coming from D.C.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And so he is vice chair of the Handgun Permit Review Board and a current active chairman, I guess. But John, why don't you bring us up to date on, I guess, what's happening, where we are, I guess Ed's going to cover the process of the board in the AOH, but how we got where we are today and where you think we're heading.
Okay, I'll try to give you a little bit of background. So I'm an attorney and I'm admitted to practice in Maryland and DC. And a number of years ago, before Governor Hogan was appointed, I became interested in this process. I personally myself was a victim of a crime involving a handgun. And so I became very interested in getting a handgun permit for myself. And years ago, it was very difficult. So many barriers, unless you knew somebody, maybe if you were a business owner, that type of thing. It was very difficult. So I started following the process. I started going to the board meetings. And when I went to the board meetings, they were back in late 2014. They were held in the Glen Burnie Police Barracks. Chairman at the time of the board gave no respect whatsoever to the Open Meetings Act. And as a result of that, we pushed for improvements in the process. And so they moved the meetings out of the Glen Burnie Police Barracks behind locked doors. And they moved them for a while out to Reisterstown. And then they moved them down to Crownsville, which is where they're currently held. And so I became a student, if you will, of the process. Eventually, having done that and gotten to know enough people, garnered an appointment from Governor Hogan last year to be a board member myself. And so what we've done, and my predecessors have done, is significantly improved the process. And so the board follows the Open Meetings Act. We're transparent. We do all the record keeping that never happened before. We've significantly increased the volume of appeals, that are being heard by the board over the numbers that were being heard in the past. And I think we've brought a degree or significantly improved degree of professionalism. The current members of the board include myself, an attorney, a security guard company owner, a detective with the Montgomery County Police Department who's assigned to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and a commissioned member of the Maryland Defense Force. We're short one member because we still haven't got a replacement for Chairman Wilson, my predecessor. And again, as you've indicated, I'm actually the vice chairman, but more recently been acting in the capacity of the acting chairman. So anyway, what happens is, and John will get you straight on the permitting process and the training that's required, and Ed can help you with what happens after you've gotten your permit with a restriction, or in the event you may have been denied for a permit. But the process is basically this. The starting point for the process is this, is that if you get a permit with a restriction, which is 80% of the permits being issued are getting restrictions nowadays, actually more than that, but 80% of the appeals that are being heard by the board are on restriction issues. As soon as you get that permit with a restriction, you have a right within 10 days to appeal to the board. And by doing that, you reserve and preserve your right moving forward. And you can have your case or your issue heard by currently a 5-member citizen review board. That's what we're working with currently. Now, there's been some changes in the law over the last year, and there's some changes that are occurring as we speak. We just don't know how they're going to pan out. That may affect how you proceed. But the bottom line is this, is that for most of you that are applying, if you have a business relationship, or you're sponsored by your employer, you can get a permit. It will be issued probably with restrictions. Those restrictions will be so unbelievably arbitrary and vague that you're probably going to want to appeal them to get them removed. And of course, that's led to a lot of the current consternation amongst some of the more leftist legislators. But in any event, you have a right to come and have a citizen review board hear your appeals. Now, if that fails for some reason, you still have a right to then go to the next step, which is the Office of Administrative Hearings, and Ed can talk to you about that. Ed is a very qualified, skilled attorney. I've known him for many years, and you're in good hands with him. So if Ed would like to pick up on the process, either from the board or at the Administrative Appeals Hearings Office, that would be great. Or otherwise, if you have questions, I can answer questions.
Okay. If you want to stick around for a little bit, or see if
Sure,
anyone's got a quick question.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, let me put you on mute. I'm going to go on mute also, and then we'll let Ed take over the show from this point. Is that good? And then we'll all come back in the next 15 minutes, something like that.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. It's all you. Go ahead and share your screen there and do what you need to do.
Well, let me introduce myself. My name's Ed Hirschon. As John had said, both of the Johns, I am an attorney. My office is in Annapolis, Maryland, and I do Second Amendment law. And I have handled both appeals at the board and at the Office of Administrative Hearings. So I'm well versed in how this all goes down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a slideshow here. And this is, unfortunately, there's a bunch of stuff going on in Annapolis. This is my contact information if anybody's interested, and I'll flash that up towards the end again. Obtaining your wear and carry permit in Maryland, and I'm going to kind of go through this really fast because John Michael had handled or spoke about a lot of this stuff. The permit process, you're going to want to call Fortress Training, take your mandated 16 hours of training, get your fingerprints, fill out your application, submit it to the MSP. You'll eventually get called in for an interview with the state police, and they will either deny or grant the permit. And as John Michael had said, there's two things: they can deny you, or they can grant your permit with restrictions. If you get a denial, you have the right to appeal to the Handgun Permit Review Board, and that's currently what the law is. That may be changing, and we're going to discuss that shortly. If you get the restrictions, again, you can ask for an informal review with the state police, and you could also appeal to the Handgun Permit Review Board. Now, it's not an either or. You can do both. Most of the time, the informal review is probably a waste of your energy and time because the state police very, 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 very rarely will lift the restrictions based on an informal review. But as John Michael had said, you do only have 10 days in which to note your appeal from the date of the letter granting your permit or denying your permit. As John said, that there are 5 civilians nominated by the governor. The hearings are on the record. The state police present their case, and then the applicant has the opportunity to cross-examine. And then the applicant has 15 minutes to present their evidence in their case. The board members do often ask questions of the applicants, so you might want to be prepared for that. And the board will either move to grant or deny the requested action, and the vote's taken. And again, this is all on the record. If the board grants the requested action, it's not final until the board issues a written decision and the MSP provides that permit or the permit without restrictions. So your current status is what it is until you get a new permit or you get your permit at all. So just because the board may have voted doesn't mean that you have got it yet. So, and John makes that very clear in the board hearings. So what happened in October 1st, 2018? Last year, the General Assembly passed a new law that gave another layer of review to the process. In that bill, they tried to abolish the board at that time, but that part of it failed. So the board is still in existence, but as of October 1st, either party, if they're not happy with the decision at the board, can appeal to the Office of Administrative Hearings. And these appeals are called de novo, meaning that each side starts on an equal footing as if no other action had taken place previously. So just some background on the Office of Administrative Hearing. It's located in Hunt Valley, Maryland. There are 54 administrative law judges. However, there's only about 10 judges that are hearing these cases. And I know that because I've handled 4 cases up there so far. And I asked one of the judges, I said, well, how many of these judges, how many of you are all handling this? And he said 10 of us. So that's something important to remember. Now, the judges hear a variety of different cases, from workers' comp issues to unemployment insurance to disability. I mean, there's a whole host of things that these judges hear. It's just not on the handguns, the handgun permits. So it's something that you need to take note of. Now, just to give you a background, it's a hearing room about the size of a large bedroom. It's like a small courtroom. There's a judge that sits at a bench. There's 2 tables, one for the MSP and one for the applicant, and there's usually just 1 or 2 other chairs in the room. So while it's open to the public, the rules state that it's subject to the availability of space, which doesn't really make it a very publicly accessible hearing. The proceedings are recorded, and the judges have 90 days in which to issue a decision once the hearing concludes. And there are rules of procedure and evidence, unlike the Handgun Permit Review Board, where there's not really a lot of evidentiary or procedural issues that would hold up somebody from representing themselves. At the Office of Administrative Hearings, unfortunately, you almost need to have an attorney represent you. So what's happening in the 2019 session right now is that both the House of Delegates and the Senate had introduced bills to abolish the Handgun Permit Review Board. It's SB 1000, which for the Senate bill, and HB 1343 for the House side. The House has not taken any action in the Judiciary Committee, and it's too late for them to do so. But the Senate did they did pass this the other day, and it passed over to the House side. It went to the Rules Committee, and I know this is very technical for a lot of people. So what happens is if it comes over late, and it is late, has to go to the Rules Committee first, and then the Rules Committee has to pass on it, and they have sent it to the Judiciary Committee, where the original bill in the House was heard. So we don't know what's going on. There's going to be hearing on it next week in the House Judiciary Committee. I believe it's April 2nd, and I don't have a time on that yet. So if anybody's interested in coming down and listening in on that, or logging into the Maryland General Assembly, you could probably see that online. Unfortunately, the public won't be allowed to testify. Only the sponsor of the legislation from the Senate, which is Senator Pam Beidel. I believe she is, I think she's Anne Arundel County, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, one of the things that happens is that the anti-gun crowd has been spreading misinformation. I'll leave it at that. That, you know, they're saying that the board hands out permits like candy. Well, the board doesn't have the authority to hand out permits. Only the state police does. So that's a misnomer. They say that the board operates in secret. It's subject to the Open Meetings Act. Every one of the meetings is open to the public. There may be closed session cases, but that's pursuant to the law that the applicant asks for. They also state that the board ignores the law. Well, that's the furthest thing from the truth, because there's an assistant attorney general that attends each session of the board. And if there was something that was contrary to the law, I'm sure he would be reporting that to Brian Frosch, and Brian Frosch would be all over it. And the last thing is, they're claiming that the board overturns the state police too often. Well, that's not entirely correct. What they're doing is, most of the cases, as John Michael had said, are cases dealing with restrictions. And the restrictions are vague and ambiguous and have a lot of problems. So now, if the Handgun Permit Review Board ceases to exist, all the decisions will go right from the Maryland State Police to the Office of Administrative Hearings. And the purpose of this is, the legislators wanted to try and dissuade people, make it harder, make it more expensive, throw as many roadblocks as possible, so that people will get tired of trying to get permits, and therefore not as many guns out there. What they're thinking, the amount of guns equals bad things. And even in the Baltimore Sun yesterday, there was an editorial saying that the Handgun Permit Review Board was responsible for all the violence in the state of Maryland. And nothing could be further from the truth, because there has not been one documented case where a permit holder has committed a crime with their firearm, and not one. So where they come out with this is just beyond me. It really is. So the state of Maryland, through the legislature and the Attorney General, they're really doing as much as possible to try and make it harder for good law-abiding citizens to, you know, arm themselves and take advantage of their rights under the Second Amendment. And it's a real problem. So there's been many organizations and people who have been working very hard the past few weeks to fight these bills. And it includes Maryland Shall Issue, the Patriot Picket, Fortress Training, my law firm, the National Rifle Association, Maryland State Rifle and Pistol Association, and current and past members of the Handgun Permit Review Board. I think I got those two kind of switched in there. Sorry about that. So what happens if the proposed legislation passes? It's not going to be good for the most people. The board will cease to exist as soon as the law passes and is signed by the governor. So it's termed an emergency legislation, so it won't go into effect on July 1st or October 1st, where most laws go in. They're going to make it effective immediately. And that's going to require all the appeals to go to the Office of Administrative Hearings. Again, I wrote appeals there. I apologize for that. And it will be up to the applicant to file the appeal in a timely manner. And most likely that's going to be 10 days after receipt of the denial or the grant of the permit with restrictions. So that's a very time-sensitive thing. So once you get that denial letter or the letter that grants you the permit with restrictions, do not delay. File your appeal immediately. And if you have any questions, please contact my office because I'd be glad to help you with that. By law, the OAH must hold the hearings within 60 days from the notice of appeal. One of the problems with this is that oftentimes they're not giving you a full 60 days in which to prepare for this hearing. A lot of times you only get 30 days or a little less than 30 days, and that will prevent you from performing what they call discovery, the ability to get a full copy of your file from the state police. And there's some procedural issues there. So again, if you don't have legal counsel, you're not going to know all of these things and what your rights are. And it's going to make it more expensive for the average citizen. And it's something that we've been trying to fight over because it's not fair to the average citizen to put out so much money to, exercise their Second Amendment rights. There's also some ambiguities in the law as to whether the state police will have the burden to prove their case or whether it's going to be on the applicant. There's some things there that, you're going to have to be aware of. So just to wrap it up, it's going to be a whole new ball game now. And there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be different going forward. So I'll entertain any questions. Again, here's my contact information. I'll leave it up for a minute. And then we'll get back to, I guess, our beautiful faces.
Yeah, we're all back here. We're all, John, can you hear? We can see you. Can you hear us?
Yep, we're good. We're good.
We're all back here. Hey, folks, listen, I want to thank Ed for doing that because he put that together over the weekend. We did it on Saturday, and it turned out to be great. We had a great conversation. A bunch of people asked questions. I have two questions for you, and they're kind of one of these, these poll participation things. And I want to ask you this. When you originally came today, why are you here? And there's four questions that should pop up there. And if you can, just kind of give us a quick overview of if you're in the appeal process or you don't have a permit or you're thinking of it or you just want to hear what's going on down there in the Annapolis world. A lot of info happening in Annapolis. Somebody's in the appeal process right now. Good for you. You're thinking of appealing your permit. I got you on that one. I appreciate that. And let's give you let's say another 5-8 seconds, something like that. And then I got another question for you. Okay, let's do this. If you're going to answer, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's end that one. And I'll share it with you. So as we kind of see this here, you're going to see that there's a person appeal process. There's 4 people on here thinking of it. And then there's a handful that just want to know what's going on in Annapolis. So that's important information for you to kind of stay involved with what's happening. Let me ask you one more, and then we're going to open up to, we got a couple questions already coming in. So if you have questions, then go ahead and, ask the question. The effect on the new law. Let me ask you this one. If it's abolished, in which way does it affect you? If they say the Handgun Permit Review Board's gone, what's it do for you or do to you? There's no effect on me at all. I wouldn't even attempt to get a permit. I'd get the permit, but heck with the appeal. And well, there you go. I'm tired of that stuff. And
the last question on Saturday, there were a lot of people said, hey, we're going to move out of state.
I'm packing my bags. I'm done with this stuff. Okay.
I actually have a client who said, if I don't win at OAH, then I'm moving out of state.
And we could talk about what's the effect if this thing goes, because I'll tell you something as soon as we get this. Let's do it in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay. So the end result is with this, we see that the people that participated here, we have 15 people roughly, and a third of them said, I get my permit, but heck with the appeal. What they want done is exactly what's they want done, would happen. And I understand exactly what you're saying because, folks, let me share this with you. This is my notice of a hearing, the Office of Administrative Hearings. This is it. This is what it looks like when you beat the state police and you get your restrictions removed. You get a love letter that says, I hope you got $2,000 or $3,000 to hire a competent legal counsel to come fight us because we're going to continue this process. So it's a real life thing that happens to people. And we're trying to battle this to where we know what the problem is. And these guys know it more than anything. It's the restrictions.
Right. And I think, John, you could probably more than adequately address this. Part of the issue here is with the restrictions, we may be talking a couple $1,000s to go to the OAH, but if you don't go to OAH and you have those restrictions, the restrictions are so ambiguous and so vague that even the state police cannot discuss or define what they mean. How's local law enforcement going to do it? And then the problem is that you could possibly be put in jail because of it. And I think, John, you could really address this because you've seen this being on the board.
Sure. Am I on, John?
Yeah, go. You're on. Go ahead.
Okay. So the deal is this, is that 80% of the cases that come before the board are people that already have permits that have these arbitrary, ambiguous restrictions. And this is the deal. The statute, the Maryland statute, the law that empowers the Maryland State Police to issue these permits allows them the discretion to apply a restriction. There is no other state in the United States or even the District of Columbia that applies these restrictions. It's only in Maryland. And again, they are discretionary restrictions. The intent of the restrictions is, for example, you're a security guard. You get a permit as a security guard. You get a restriction that says your permit is valid only while you're doing business for your security guard company. Okay, fine, that makes perfect sense. What's happening is that the Maryland State Police has incorporated into their standard operating procedures that restrictions are not applied on an individualized basis, but that they shall be imposed on all permits that are issued. And so that's the problem, because they've developed into their standard operating procedure, the shall, they basically, it's under the law, it's called ultra vires. And that means basically that they've exceeded their authority. They've turned a discretionary right into a mandatory obligation. And that's what makes it so wrong. And so they crank out all these permits, they do it reluctantly, and they slap on these restrictions that make no sense to anyone. So that when we have the Maryland State Police testifying in front of the board on any given week, we ask them over and over and over, and their testimony under oath is that we have no idea what conducting business means. There is no definition for that. But that's the restriction that they're putting on the permits. So by their own admission, they are incorporating ambiguous, unreasonable, indeterminate restrictions on permits that nobody can understand.
Let me ask you this, John, because you many times, and you've said it many times to the Senate and to the House, where you have representatives of the Maryland State Police sworn testimony on behalf of the board that says we have no definition to what this means, and only the permit holder knows the definition of what conducting business means. Is that true?
That's correct. It's absolutely correct. They testify under oath that only the permit holder himself or herself could possibly know whether they are conducting business or not. And
so
I've
how
testified,
could you get arrested to that?
Well, I mean, I've testified in the House and the Senate that it's absolutely absurd. It's absolutely absurd that we let the Maryland State Police get away with this. Now, and let me backstep for a second. I think the individual troopers that are manning the licensing division, right. Excuse me?
No, they're doing their job. That's what they're doing.
I think they're under incredible pressure, under incredible pressure from management above. And let's make no mistake about this, okay? There's a lot of complaints about Governor Hogan not interceding and exercising his authority. And I understand those complaints. But the reality of it is it is the Secretary of the Maryland State Police, Colonel Palazzi, who is authorized by delegated authority by the Maryland General Assembly, by the legislature, to make these determinations. And he could make this go away after he has coffee tomorrow morning, but he's refused and declined to do so. And he's refused and declined to do so in spite of the fact that all of our neighboring jurisdictions, we've got 16 states which are now constitutional carry. We have the District of Columbia, our neighbor, whose handgun permitting scheme was modeled directly after Maryland's and was deemed unconstitutional because it required a good reason. It required a good reason, similar to Maryland's good and substantial reason. And I mean, we had Senator Bobby Zirkin, amazing, not known to be a favorite of pro-Second Amendment, pro-constitutional folks. But we had Bobby Zirkin on the floor of the Senate saying, hey, you people are missing the big picture, right? You're talking about trying to ban a board or abolish a board that's just trying to do their job, right? You've got a bigger issue to deal with, and that is that shall issue is coming to Maryland. It's coming to Maryland, okay? All right? Now, I, as a board member, I don't get to consider that. I'm constrained by the law. I have to work within the law, and all of the board members do so. But what we've got going on is a agency uncontrolled by anybody. Basically, we have the Maryland State Police Licensing Division, basically uncontrolled by anybody, that are denying folks their individual fundamental rights, or they're imposing restrictions on them that not a single other jurisdiction in this country imposes. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why does that happen? How does that happen?
Crazy. Hey, we got a couple. Go ahead, Ed. And now I got six questions.
The worst part is, because of these vague and ambiguous restrictions, every person out there who is carrying and has those restrictions that say, while conducting business as XYZ corporation or company or whatever it is, you're the one who's going to be stopped on the side of the road, and they're going to say, well, why are you carrying? Are you conducting business right now? And the thing that you've got to know is that anything you say violates your Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate yourself. And these cops just want to get you talking more and more, because the more you talk, the more you dig yourself into a hole. And if you don't say anything and you do exercise your Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate yourself, that may provide to them probable cause in which to take you into custody and arrest you and book you. And now you've got to deal with a court case that's going to cost $10,000 or more to get you out of, jail. And, you're going to have to make bail, and you're going to have to go in front of a commissioner or a judge. And it's a mess. And again, as John Michael said, this is something that could be done very easily with a stroke of a pen by the superintendent of the state police, Colonel Palazzi, by just saying, we're going to get rid of these restrictions because they do cause too many problems. There's too many issues out there, and we don't have training for our own folks, yet alone the other law enforcement agencies in the state, including, every county, every town that's incorporated, the Metro cops in DC that are operating in Maryland, or the Metro cops in Baltimore that are operating, the MTA police, the Capitol Park and police. And there's some of these places that you can't carry, like on Metro. You can't carry in state buildings. You can't be in state parks. But these cops also have jurisdiction in a lot of places. And you're out there, and you're potentially going to be a target because you are carrying.
So would you tell a client too, if they engage in official contact with law enforcement and they see the permit, or they find out they have a gun and he asks, are you conducting business?
You shut the hell up.
What attorney say? Tell them you're in full compliance with the permit as outlined by the Secretary of Maryland State Police, and that's all I'm going to say. That's it.
And there you go.
Know what conducting business is.
You just be quiet, because anything you say beyond that is just going to get you deep doo-doo.
I got 6 or 7 questions in a minute. Go ahead.
only the permit holder can determine whether he's conducting business or not. That's
Right.
what the state police
Right.
said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they have said that. They've said that both at the board, and they have said it under oath at the Office of Administrative Hearings.
Yeah.
That
So-
in the exact language I've heard over and over again is that the permit holder is the subject matter expert of what their business is. So they would be the ones that would know whether or not they're conducting business. The problem is that the state police have not issued any training to their own agency, the troopers on the road, nor have they issued any training to any other law enforcement agency in the state of Maryland. So you've got a lot of cops out there that aren't used to it. I had a client 2 weeks ago who got stopped in Annapolis, and he had never even encountered a person with a wear and carry permit previously. He didn't know what to do. He called his sergeant. The sergeant ended up coming out onto the scene, and neither one of them had dealt with it before. And they ended up determining that the permit was valid, and they let him go. But, you know, they didn't look on the back to see if he had restrictions. They just didn't know. They never dealt with it. So this is a scary thing.
I see that a lot. Now, I have 7 questions. Let me get a couple questions in here, and then we can kind of see where we are, because I want to keep it within the next 15 minutes to kind of wrap this up. And if people have other questions, let's bring them in. And then any closing remarks you guys want to make, you're more than welcome to. But here's a couple questions. Joe popped this one in when we were talking about that 10-day process. When you get the letter in the mail, it says you have 10 days. He says, if longer than 10 days, then what happens? Go ahead, John Michael, what happens?
Sure. You got 10 days from receipt of the decision. So I'll give you an example. I myself personally applied for a renewal permit. I got today in today's mail. I received the decision, and I have 10 days from today, 10 days from receipt, to submit and get my appeal into the hands of the board to preserve my rights. If it gets there on the 11th day, you're SOL. Okay? You guys know what that means, SOL. Okay? Because when you show up in front of the board, they don't have jurisdiction because your appeal was not timely.
Okay, so 10 days critical.
You're barred. It's absolutely critical. And so, and this is a good point, John. I'm glad you brought it up. So that for these folks that are stuck in the middle here, that are worried about, well, we're in a state of flux, what's going on with the board, what's going on with OAH, what's the proper appeal, what's the proper process. If you get a notice from the Maryland State Police that says this is the decision and you're dissatisfied with it, you get within 10 days of receiving that notice into the hands, get it into the hands of the Handgun Permit Review Board. We have a great administrator over there, an appeal notice, and that will preserve your rights.
What you do with it, you may change later on, but at least you keep your rights going.
Exactly. It's
right.
A placeholder. It's
okay.
think of it as sticking your foot in the door. You're not closing the door to your right to proceed on an appeal. If you decide later that you don't want to follow it, that's fine. But if you don't stick your foot in the door and the door closes,
you're done.
It's closed.
Well,
okay.
There is another way around that. If it's a permit restriction that you're appealing, you can, and if you're not untimely to go to the board, what you can do is you can file a modification with the Maryland State Police with a $10 check, because that's what they charge, and ask for a modification and provide a very detailed explanation of why you're seeking the modification. Most likely, they will deny it. You get that
starts again,
and then you just file it
10
again.
days then, right? You got 10 days at that point, right?
Right.
Okay, number 2 question. Go ahead.
No, that's a great point. That's for a denial, not for a restriction.
What is
for a restriction also? If you seek the restriction?
Yeah, we get into legal loopholes to it, but just do the 10 days, right? Here's a question for you, and John, you'll see this a lot. Michael, here we go. And think about this from denials to and you can talk a little bit about the criminalization of citizens in the Firearm Safety Act 2013, and this will kind of lead to a question in, which is, Don wants to know, what's the typical basis for a Handgun Permit Review Board denial and appeal? What do you see, and why are they coming to you? How many denials, how many appeals? And
so what happens is, I'm sorry, the fellow's name was Don.
Don. Yep.
Don. So if you're a prohibited person, you're not getting a permit because you come to the appeal board. We just can't. We're bound by the law. We've been very clear. There is a lot of vagueness and subjectivity that's been built into the law. But if you're a prohibited person, if you're a user of CDS, if you are a habitual drunkard, if you have been cited and held on a peace order or a temporary restraining order, all of those factors weigh against you. You know, and that's the bottom line, is that if you're ultimately a prohibited person under Maryland or federal law, there's nothing that the board can do to help you, and we're not going to help you. Okay, right. You know, so that's the bottom line.
What do you see coming to you though? Do you see more denials or more, I would need my restrictions removed because of?
Absolutely, positively. 80% of the cases that come before the board are people that have already been issued a permit by the Maryland State Police, who have already decided that that individual has a good and substantial reason to have a permit, but then because of their crazy standard operating procedure, impose some sort of vague and ambiguous restriction. And so that's 80% of the cases. And so I've said this multiple times anecdotally, we try to hear as many cases as we can a night. More recently, we've been limited to about 14 cases a night. And so most nights we have anywhere from maybe 2 to 4 people that have been denied. The balance of the 14 cases are restrictions. Last week was a little bit unusual. We had, I think it was 6 cases that were denied.
6 or 7.
Right. We've had as few as 1 or 2. So it varies week to week, but I would say on average that it averages between 2 to 4 denials, and the balance, you know, anywhere from 10 to 12 being restrictions. And you know, the problem is that the Maryland State Police has never seen a permit that they don't want to see restricted. That's the problem. That's the problem.
Right. And you know what? That probably out of these 7 things here that I'm looking at different questions, it's the same pattern I'm seeing more than more in many different ways. And Ed, you might be able to answer this one. I get, and I hear this in class all the time, right? Here's the same question over and over. Let's see what it says. I'll come back to that one. For the purposes of field interview, I guess I'm just supposed to say I'm conducting business and shut up. And then another question, that's from Shane. Another one says, from what I've heard, I'm assuming you should never volunteer, that I have a permit if pulled over for a traffic violation, from Mark. And then another question up here was, well, that's a restriction question on that one. But I'm getting another one coming in right now that says pretty much, hey, what do I do? The biggest fear people hear, and you know it, so I'm not giving you guys new information, is they're afraid of getting arrested. And they know they can't store their gun if they're outside the permit because they're breaking that law. So the state's kind of put them in a, I think we call that a trap.
Yeah, what it's done is it's criminalized what was previous to the 2013 Firearm Safety Act. It's criminalized what was otherwise non-criminal behavior. It was an administrative issue between the Maryland State Police and the permit holder at that point. Now you're potentially going to jail, and that's what's scaring so many people, and that's why the vast number of the appeals that are at the board are for the restrictions, and that's why John has been so busy there at the board, hearing almost 270 cases last year.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say was that it's interesting. I've had a former commander of the licensing division counsel me, don't ever disclose that you're carrying a firearm, even during a traffic stop, because you're just asking for trouble. That's coming from a former commander of the licensing division.
Because they don't know how to handle it.
Who tells me, do not disclose that you're carrying a firearm, because under Maryland law, you're not obligated to. Now, I will tell you, I disagree with that a little bit. I myself personally was stopped a month or 2 ago for speeding 10 miles over the limit or whatever on my way to work. I was carrying. I did not have a jacket on, and I clearly had a firearm inside the waistband at 3 o'clock. And I thought, geez, it's probably not a bad idea to disclose to the officer that, you know, I'm carrying a firearm for both of our safety. And I did so. And I think he really appreciated it. But the first thing he did, he flipped over the permit and he looked for a restriction. And when he didn't see a restriction, he was like, wow, I've never seen one of these before, a permit without a restriction, right? And he said, you must be law enforcement. I said, yeah, no, I'm not a law enforcement officer. Well, how do you have this permit? I'm like, well, I have it, and that really should be enough. But he said, okay, let me go back, and if your record's clean, and he did, he went back, and he didn't issue me a citation. He issued me a warning for the 10 miles and over or whatever it was. Right. And then after we were done, he said, hey, by the way, I just got to ask, why are you carrying a gun? And I explained to him very briefly without getting into too much detail. And he said, yeah, that's a good reason. Have a good day, sir. And I was on my way, Right. So there's no one size fits all answer for everybody. You're going to have to decide. I was carrying a firearm that was practically openly carried. I didn't have a jacket on. I had to reach for my wallet. You're in that situation, I'm going to tell you, you're probably better off maybe declaring that you've got it, for your safety and his.
I always tell folks, I said, look, if the person coming up to you is gray haired, bald, or overweight, they don't want to fight you. Just talk to them like a human. They would just want to go home. Right. It's the guy that comes with trooper and roided up. You're going to get thumped. So, but you got to play that. But you can go either way. Now I got a couple other questions real quick for you. And this is, let's go to, let me see this one here. Okay, for the purpose of, I got that one we did, which is I'm conducting business. Yes, we did that one. Okay, so here you go. If you got any more questions, folks, just type them in because we're going to finish this up soon. How will the legislation, if passed, affect renewals? So what would happen in a renewal process? Would the state police be more emboldened?
I know that John just got his renewal today. The problem is once you get the restrictions removed, when you get the renewal, the restrictions are back on there. And John, you can confirm that.
Yeah. So what's happened is the Maryland State Police has testified in hearings that that their standard operating procedure is their standard operating procedure. And so when they review a permit application, original permit application, they make a determination. If they decide that you don't have a good substantial reason or you should be given a restriction, that's what they do. 2 years or 3 years later, when you submit a renewal, they don't care what the board did. They don't care what a court said. Their position is they're processing that application as if it was a brand new application, an original application. And therefore, if they imposed a restriction previously, they're probably going to do it again. And it throws you back into the cycle. And so, again, I'm a little bit at liberty to talk a little bit more tonight than I might normally be because my term on the board is going to expire in 2 weeks or so. And there's not a likelihood that anybody that's in the audience would possibly appear before a board that I'd be presiding over. So I'm a little bit at greater liberty to explain it. But we had someone appear recently before the board who had appeared before the board 10 months ago and who had his restriction removed by the board. I wasn't on it at the time. And now he came back before the board 10 months later because his permit expired. They issued it with a restriction. He appealed. He got back before the board and we removed the restriction again. And so that's what Ed's talking about. There's let's call it a recalcitrance mentality within the management of the Maryland State Police. I'm not talking about the individual troopers that are working day to day trying to do their job. I'm talking about the management philosophy or ideology or the policy that surrounds this stuff. And there's an opportunity for that to be changed, but there's a steadfast refusal on the part of the Maryland State Police to make those changes. And so I'm going to just tell you this, and then I'll let John finish off how he wants to. None of these barriers are a reason to throw in the towel and not to apply and not to go see John and get your training. These are all more reasons. The more people that are willing to apply and go through the training and submit their applications, the more demand there is, the more the legislature, the more the executive branch of the government is going to have to pay attention to it, right? Because your constituents. And so when the constituency speaks, okay, and there's enough volume, then people will listen.
That's true. Well, listen, I'm going to finish up with a couple of things. First off, I got two quick ones, or one. Oh, can you get a while conducting business as an employee restriction removed, or is that a tough one? That's a real quick one for you.
Well, I would suspect it would depend upon the individual situation, what his business is, and whether he's on call 24/7, that he would require to be at a moment's notice back on call.
Yeah.
So I would think that it's situational.
Yeah. So what the Maryland State Police likes to see by employees, they like to see a sponsoring letter.
Right.
And so then they put that restriction on there, valid only while an employee of, and maybe while conducting business of. Sometimes we don't see that. We just see it while an employee of. We've seen ones that have said things like valid only while an employee of the Department of Defense. Okay, well, if an employee of the Department of Defense and it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm having dinner with my wife, with my wife in a restaurant, am I still an employee of the Department of Defense? Yes. That is how crazy the language and how variable the language is on these restrictions. And that's why frankly, again, the Maryland State Police under the statute, and I'm obliged to follow the statute, has a right to impose them. But this is the key. The application of that discretion has to be without arbitrariness, okay? And when the Maryland State Police says, I will take a may issue restriction, a discretionary component of the statute, and the Maryland State Police, by fiat from Colonel Palazzi or the Secretary of the State Police, turns it into a must issue a restriction, that is an abuse of discretion. That is an abuse of discretion. And each and every time I see that come before the board, I will shoot that down. Okay. Now, if there is an individualized and a particularized analysis that is made before applying the discretion, before applying the restriction, that's a different story. But what we see 99% of the time, which is why 80% of the cases that come before the board are overturned, because they're these crazy, ridiculous restrictions, okay, because they have no individualized basis, right? The answer from the Maryland State Police is, why is this permit imposed? Oh, because it enhances public safety. And the next question is, how? And you get a blank stare. And if you don't get a blank stare, you get because it says that in the standard operating procedure, okay? That is an abuse of discretion. And that's why 80% of these cases that come before the board, which are restrictions, get overturned. So don't believe all this crap that you're hearing in the legislature about giving permits out like they're candy and all these other things that Mr. Hirschon talked about earlier today. It's just fabricated falsehoods and untruths.
Now, let me ask you this.
In other words, they were lies.
Yeah, they're called lies. Right?
Yeah.
Now, hey, I got two questions that I'm going to take offline. I'm going to share them here, but I'm not going to put their names out there, but I'm going to share them. And then I'm going to recommend you contact Ed. And if you don't have his, and he'll talk to you, he won't charge you. I'm going to tell you that right now. He'll talk to you for free, right?
Yeah, I love to talk.
He does. And if you buy him a sandwich, he'll talk longer. So here's the two questions.
A hoagie from Philly would be wonderful.
Right. Here's one, and the guy that wrote this, I encourage you to talk to Ed and give him a call. And I'll Ed, when we're finished, why don't you just give him, say your number again in a second. But here's what I got. It says, I got denied in January. And we don't know the reason, right? So they need to talk to you. I got denied, and you might be able to just point them in the right direction. I got denied in January and submitted the appeal notice immediately. When can I expect to get a hearing? John Michael maybe will tell you that.
I can
And I only have an email stating they received my appeal request. So I guess Stevie, the administration's told them, you have it at the board.
Right.
I'm a first-time applicant and don't have a permit. So
Okay, so I'll start off and Ed can follow up. So for the person that asked the question, there is no question that there is a significant backlog that has developed at the board. Part of the reason the backlog is developed at the board is because the state police has refused to provide more than 14 case files every 2 weeks. We have offered to do a third meeting a month. We've offered to meet all day on Fridays. Statute requires the Maryland State Police to provide the files to us so that we can conduct these hearings in a timely manner. I will admit that because of the volume, it's challenging, but we've requested an increased number of files from the state police and they have refused. The assistant commander at the Maryland State Police flat out sent me an email and said they were refusing to do that. And so they are artificially choking off the ability for applicants to get their hearings before the board. There's no nice way to say that. I will tell you this. I had a lieutenant colonel at the Maryland State Police look me straight in the eye and tell me that it was the strategy of the Maryland State Police to force these appeals to OAH to increase the cost in order to squelch the demand. He said it to me straight in my face, and I looked at him and I said, do you have no concerns about the due process rights of the citizenry? And he looked at me like he didn't even know what due process meant.
Or citizenry.
Or citizenry meant. Okay. And
or employer.
Right. And so, but to answer the individual's question, right now, under the current process, it could take quite a while to get to the board. Okay. If the board is under this emergency legislation abolished, I heard Senator Pam Beidel from Montgomery County tell Senator Miller and all the other senators on the Senate floor the other day that Administrative Law Judge Dewberry, the chief administrative law judge in Hunt Valley, claimed that they were fully prepared to hear all of these cases and that there wouldn't be any delay and that anybody that was in the backlog at the board would get their hearing within 45 days.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, wait a minute, by the way, and the testimony was, in order to abolish the board, was that there would be no additional cost to the taxpayers of Maryland. Well, there are currently almost 450 cases in backlog at the board. And so if you dump 450 cases on the administrative law judges at OAH 2 weeks from now, perhaps Ed could comment on what's going to happen.
Well, the law states that these cases need to be heard within 60 days of the notice of appeal. There's some question as far as what the legislation states, whether or not they're just going to come over from the board to OAH and you'll get a notice of appeal, or whether the state police will, or the Office of Administrative Hearings, send you a notice saying that the board no longer exists and you have the right to file an appeal, and then you have 10 days in which to file your appeal. So the language hasn't been set yet, and if you do notice it, you'll have the 60 days. But the problem is that I've heard 40 judges have been trained, but only 10 judges are hearing these cases. And one of my other concerns is that the training was conducted by the Maryland State Police, which tells me that the state police have provided training to the judges on what they want the judges to hear, not what the law specifically is. And that concerns me. I think, though, that, on restriction cases, there's a very good shot that, applicants can be successful. It's a question of whether or not they can get out their arguments in a logical manner that the judge can see what it is, what it's about.
Okay. So let me ask you this one. Josh is asking this. He says, do people appealing have a good chance of winning, or is it a waste of time? Now, here's his real kind of asterisk that we got to pay attention to for his behalf. And this is why I said maybe he should just call you. I'm in Oakland, Maryland, right? So that's about
All the
3
way
hours
far
plus
out
away.
Western Maryland.
He might, well, I can give him the real advice. When you get out of town, when you get up top of the hill, either make a right, go about 3-4 miles, or follow 219 south for about another 10 miles, and you'll be in West Virginia. And at that point, you don't have to deal with any of this as close as you are. But
Unless he works in Maryland.
He's about as far out as you can get. So, Ed, I want him to contact you because I want him to at least have 15, 20 minutes with you of understanding
absolutely.
the situation, because the man's 3 hours away, from at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably more than 3 hours, but
probably. Actually, when we all add it up, it's about a 15-hour commitment he's going to have, because he's going to come down and back, down and back, down. I mean, so it's.
Let me add this. I mean, it's a little bit premature because the board isn't dead yet.
Yeah, we don't even know what's going to happen.
We don't have it yet, but
we're hoping to kill it. They kill the legislation that abolishes the board.
Right.
If you were to come to the board and then have to go to the OEH, or if the board is killed off and you have to go to OEH, the actual law provides that these hearings could be held in the regional
Closer to him, right?
Of OEH, and OEH has a regional location in Cumberland. The problem is Mr. Hirschon's indicated, is that so far all the hearings have been held in Hunt Valley. But if I'm a applicant in Allegheny or Washington County and I have this appeal, I ought to be able to go to Cumberland, not Hunt Valley.
Right, exactly. But the board
I've asked at the office of OAH, I asked the question because I don't like going up to Hunt Valley either. I'm in Annapolis. So in order for me to get there at 9 a.m., I've got to leave very early and deal with a lot of traffic to get there. And sometimes I get cases, back-to-back days. And so I'll have, one in the morning, one in the afternoon the same day. And then next day I'm having one in the morning, one in the afternoon. So I don't want to go back and forth. It's a little long, but they've told me all of these cases for the handgun permits will be held in Hunt Valley. I don't know whether that's going to be the case going forward. I think it's unfair for applicants to have to travel throughout the state to exercise their rights. I would make an argument and a motion in that particular case that the case should be heard, closer to the applicant's residence because of convenience. And I think there's case law that does support this out there. So that would be my argument. So if that's a concern, that's something we can certainly look into a little bit further.
Okay, so let's finish up with this. April the 2nd, it looks like it's scheduled 1 p.m. in Judiciary. At 1 p.m., right? Okay, 1 p.m. So between now and April the 2nd, what action can these folks take and what should they do? And then number two, if after April 2nd it's killed and it's passed and it's going to go to the floor, what would be their strategy then? So let's say you're going to do something, folks, not just sit here and chit chat. Let's get that in the game. Let's get some muscle in the game, So what would you tell them to do between now? Who do they need to contact if they looked it up?
They would contact their delegates where they live and let them know what their position is on this, that they want to keep the board, that the bill to abolish the board is fraught with all kinds of issues, that the board is there for the citizens. It's a way for the layperson, the average citizen, to go and address a grievance that the government, the government's decision, that they don't need to hire an attorney if they don't want to, that they can appear before this board on their own, and that the board is 5 citizens as opposed to 1 judge. So you've got 5 people that are making this decision as opposed to 1 person. And it's a fairer system.
Right. So let me just add real quick to add on to Ed. When you go to OAH, you're not going to citizen oversight. You're going to the government. You're going to the government asking for your right. Okay. When you go to a true citizen oversight board, as this board has been in place since 1972, and nobody had a complaint about it until the last couple of years. Okay. That's the difference. But the second part of my answer is going to be this, right? It seems that the fix is in because the Mike and Mike show in Annapolis has been pushing this hard. We've never seen bills go in and come out of the Rules Committee in an hour in our lives, okay? And that's how fast this is happening here. So what's your next line of defense? Call Governor Hogan. Tell Governor Hogan that you want him to veto these bills if they get passed.
And to remove the restrictions, if he would. Let me show you.
That's a great point, John, because, you know, a lot of people have been bashing Governor Hogan for not, you know, ordering the removal of these restrictions. And that's a little bit, it's not entirely accurate. The Maryland General Assembly, through this legislation, authorized the Secretary of the State Police
to do that,
to either impose restrictions or not impose restrictions. But the Secretary of the State Police works at the pleasure of the governor. And, you know, you would think that this would be a short conversation over coffee. You know, we're not talking about giving more people permits than already have permits. We're simply talking about eliminating all these crazy restrictions that are causing all this turmoil, that have created all this fodder for the anti-gun and the uber liberal lefties to come out and claim that the board is giving permits out like they're candy. And none of it is true. It's simply not true. And so if the governor and Secretary Palazzi ever had this discussion, you would think, like I said, it could be handled over coffee. And if Secretary Palazzi didn't see it the same way as the governor did, then maybe it's time for Secretary Palazzi to spend more time with the grandchildren.
There you go. Hey, now the judiciary, it's in judiciary right now, correct?
It's in the House Judiciary.
Okay,
Yeah,
so let me kind of give you this and we can walk through this because I want you guys to see this, okay? So I just want to, if you just look up, if you've never been here, if you go to Maryland General Assembly, Google it, this comes up. Go to committees. This is the committee section. And if you go down here to the House, and click on that, it's going to open up the judiciary and every person that's in this committee. Here they are. Full committee, Civil Law Procedures Committee. I mean, this is, where should they go?
You want to go to the judiciary.
So up top here, full committee right here, right?
No,
this is it.
I'm having trouble seeing it, John.
That's
but
okay. Family law, public safety. It's public safety committee, yes? Or is it in full judiciary?
No, it's the full judiciary.
Okay.
You got that.
So here it is. So on here, we got these names. There's some friends of ours, correct, that are on here that do believe in helping.
We have some great friends on this committee, and I've been working with Delegate Cox and Pippi and Arakin and McComas and Hartman. They have been wonderful to us. I met with Delegates Arakin, Cox, and Hartman yesterday afternoon, where we discussed some of these issues in greater length. We had met with them last Friday as well, and they're definitely on our side. They've been very, very friendly to the Second Amendment community, and I encourage everybody to reach out to their own delegates. But if one of your delegates is on this committee, then definitely contact them and let them know how you feel about this legislation. And
is there anybody on here that you would say contact and kind of just that maybe isn't, but is open to hearing about people, particularly if people have been, there might be people in here that have been, they felt like, you know, it's taken forever, the rights weren't, they were kind of just,
well, I would definitely reach out to Delegate Watson on this.
Down here, the bottom guy, Ron Watson, right?
Ron Watson. You know, and if you've been, know anybody that's been discriminated against in obtaining their permit, Delegate Watson, I think, would love to hear from you with regard to this because it's an important issue. First of all, nobody should be discriminated against based on their race or their religion or their gender or any other factor, because we're all citizens of this country and each citizen has the right to exercise the Second Amendment. And as long as you're not a prohibited person.
Right.
So if you feel that you've been discriminated against, or you know anybody that's been discriminated against in obtaining their permit from the Maryland State Police, then I would definitely reach out to Delegate Watson and let him know about it. Let his staff
His phone number's right here. If you click on that, here's his phone number.
I think he's got two phone numbers.
Yeah. There's a 410 and a 301, and toll free. But if you go to legislators and committees, you can find it out. Or if you just go to legislators and you want to find what district number you're in, who your legislators, all their contact information's here, folks. So there's no reason why we can't just, kind of reach out to them and say, hey, man, it's time to wake up to this issue. But, I just want to kind of leave you with that. But guys, I cannot.
Grassroots effort definitely has a lot of effect upon these legislators, the delegates and the senators. As John Michael had said earlier, that, they're very constituent oriented and they hear it. So if they're getting enough phone calls, they're getting enough emails, they're going to realize that, they've got an issue here that they need to pay attention to. And believe me, the anti-gun crowd has been working their phones and reaching out to the delegates for quite a long time. And we're more of a grassroots organization. We don't have, Bloomberg's money behind us.
If any of you guys want to rate a couple $1 billion, it'd be great. We appreciate it. One question did pop up, but it is, just so I don't forget, it's Senate Bill 1000 that's crossed over.
Yes.
It's going to be with House Bill 1343 that kind of compromised that.
Right. Well, 1343 has not left the judiciary at all. So it's SB 1000, Senate Bill 1000.
Right. Okay.
Right. What Ed's saying is SB 1000 now being considered by the House.
Right. Right. Now, I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to go back to this page in 1 second, and I'm just going to, I'm going to say we just did this. Is there anybody, do you guys know, or is there any place where someone, and I'm going to put this back up here so you can see the law and how to do this. A question came up, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Are there any templates that you would say people could use, or is it kind of just tell your heart and your situation, or is there any place, does MSI have templates or anything that you know of?
Yeah. So you're talking about the good and substantial requirement.
No. I'm talking about like right now that, something to send.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If you go, I haven't looked at it for a while, but the folks over at MSI are great. Mark Penick and his folks over there are very knowledgeable. They get really good stuff out. And so they have a legislation tracking stuff over there. So if you go over to Maryland Shall Issue, I think it's marylandshallissue.org.
Yeah.
Again, I haven't looked at it for a while.
Or just Google Maryland Shall Issue.
It'll come up.
Right. It'll pop up and you can search their website, and their website will have some suggested testimony. They'll have examples of testimony that have already been provided, and you can find great stuff over there. Again, good. I haven't looked at it because I haven't been active with MSI. My position on the board, I just
neutralized that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I've been very neutral, on it, but I know that they do great work over there.
Well, let me finish with this, and then we'll wrap up here. Here's the thing for you folks. Look, if you go back to this if you just General Assembly of Maryland, come up here to the home page, you go down here by number and you type in SB 100. It can't get any simpler than that. And you hit that thing right there. That legislation is going to come up. And if you want to see the documents to it, you want to see the actual bill, you want to see what came out of third read, Handgun repealed that. You can go down here, Senate first, here you go, Senate vote, floor amendment. You can see everything that, and I'm looking for what actually came out, which would be adopted.
It would be towards the bottom.
Towards the bottom, that's what I'm looking for. It says, this is vote Senate floor adopted. Is it floor amendment? No, that's an amendment. I'm looking for the third read. Public hearing, that says repeal. Oh, this would be it. This is the repeal of the text that passed, right? So this would be the law, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so what's happened is they've gone through a whole bunch of mental gymnastics, and there's been a bunch of amendments that have been proposed and rejected and proposed and accepted and so forth and so on. So what you want to do is look at that third reader. That's going to tell you basically where.
And let me do this for everybody right now. We'll finish up with this. I'll let these guys. I'm going to send this to everybody, and this is going to go to everybody right here. Here's your little gift from Fortress Training. It's right there for you. There's the law. I mean, that's what's being proposed right there. If you wanted, it's right there. Guys, do you have anything you want to say? Because we're going to be finished here in a minute. So wrap it up, 10 seconds, whatever you got.
Yeah, let me just give my phone number out and my email. It's my email is ed at Hershon Legal. That's spelled HERSHON legal.com. And my office number is 443-926-1702. 443-926-1702. And if anybody has any questions, please reach out to me. I'm very accessible. Tomorrow
Let them know you were on this webinar. Let them know you were here, right?
Yeah. And I'll certainly be glad to answer any questions that you may have and give you any guidance that you may need. And if, you can make decisions how you want to proceed after that.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
John, anything?
Yeah, I just want to give a big shout out to yourself, John, and Fortress.
Absolutely.
Been that there's a bunch of trainers out there that just bring clients on board, charge them a fee, train them, give them a certificate, and then they're pretty much abandoned to their own devices. And my experience has been that Fortress works very hard to work with their clients to help them out, see them through the process. And so I think that's a great service that's being provided. And then secondarily, I'd give a big shout out to Ed. I've known Ed for many years. We've worked together in the past many years ago, and guy with a lot of integrity. He knows what he's doing, so don't hesitate with Ed. So, and then the last thing I would say is just to the last couple of folks that are watching is if you have an opportunity, reach out to your legislators and tell them what your thoughts are, okay? I mean, the Mike and Mikes in Annapolis are strong-arming, and twisting arms to get this thing passed, okay? It's political. It's intended to deprive you of your rights. It's intended to have the government, have more control over what have previously been your individual fundamental rights by taking it away from the power, the authority away from the Citizen Oversight Review Board. And so if you have a couple minutes, make a phone call to your legislator, because whether it's a delegate or a senator, if they're not in office, right? If they're not in office, what are they going to do? They're first and foremost worried about getting back in office. As long as they're in office, they can worry about what Mike and Mike want to do to them, right? But they've got to be in office. So first and foremost, they're concerned about getting reelected. So if they hear from their constituents, right, and they think that there's a risk they're not going to be elected, who cares what Mike and Mike tell them to do, right?
And
Well, listen,
Mike and Mike may not be there next year anyway.
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
Listen, John, I just want to, nobody's probably said this publicly, but you're a career attorney. What you do, and you get down to it, you probably make pennies on the hour helping citizens in Maryland and taking time to care enough for them. And you were just somebody that sat in the chair 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and got enough interest and got involved. And now you're pretty much listening to folks for the next, 30 days or, when your term ends. But thank you for all you've done over the last few years.
I appreciate that. That's exactly true. I mean, I went through this process for myself, and when I saw the abuses that were taking place, and I saw that it wasn't just me, and then I saw that other people were ill-equipped to handle this, I made a decision to investigate it, figure out what was going on, and I was fortunate enough to get an appointment from the governor, and I'm very proud of what I've done and my fellow board members have done. Contrary to all the falsehoods being, posted in the Sun paper or some of the other birdcage liners, we have absolutely positively followed the law. And that is evident by the fact that for years, there hasn't been a single case that has been appealed by the Maryland State Police successfully to the circuit court, finding that the board has done anything outside of what is required by the law. This is political. This is all political.
There you go. Okay, folks, that's it. I hope you enjoyed tonight. It was a great thing. I appreciate the comments, Shane. Thank you so much. Informative. He says, I'm sorry to see you go, John. Seems like we lost an ally on the board. Well,
absolutely.
Just fighting for keeping this board. So, guys, God bless. Hope to see you soon out there on the range or someplace in a class, or these guys, if they can help you in any way, feel free to reach out. But other than that, have a great evening. Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.